Hey everyone, we're Gabby,
Karim,
and Jules,
and you're listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health.
Last season we took you behind the scenes of some of our mock MMI stations.
So we've talked about the GAMSAT and we've talked about the interviews. So now on to the next step. This season we're talking all things getting ready for med school.
We will be running you through what a day in the life of a medical student looks like, what study techniques to know about, what your career is going to look like, and much more.
So stay tuned and get ready to get med ready. Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the Making of an Incredible MD. Today I'm very lucky to be joined by Perry from Griffith University and Gianni from the University of Queensland. And we'll be discussing these universities just so you guys can get an idea of how to choose your preferences when you're applying for those GEMSAS applications. We thought that this episode would be a really good way to give you guys some information about these universities and just basically give you an insider insight into what these universities are like. So you can make a really informed decision when you're starting to put in your preferences for these universities when you're applying for medicine. Before we get started, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting today for this podcast. I'm personally in Melbourne, so that's the Wurundjeri country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of that land, the people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. And on behalf of Gianni and Perry, I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of their lands, past, present, and emerging. So getting straight into the episode, perhaps we can start off with Perry from Griffith University. Perry, tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey into medicine.
Hey, thanks, Karim. Perry, as you just told me, but I'm first year at Griffith Uni. I completed a Bachelor of Biomedical Science with you, actually, so that was a good time.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we were buddies in biomed.
Many a study sesh. That was back in Monash in Victoria. In my med journey, I actually went through and sat the GAMSAT 3 times, but only first 2 weren't so great. But then the third one in the COVID year, I actually got well enough to score an interview with Melbourne. But then I actually got accepted into Griffith, which was a pretty nice surprise. And then, yeah, other than that, I'm just kind of adapting to life up here in Queensland. It's pretty different.
Yeah. So you sat your final GAMSAT in 2020 and you got accepted into medicine in 2021 at Griffith University.
Yeah, that's right.
Incredible. And what was the GAMSAT sitting process like for you?
Is in like the last one
or just in general, just the whole process? So you sat it 3 times. Tell us about your experience.
Okay, well, the first 2 times were like the paper-based exam, so it was around like 5 hours of exam time. You had 1 hour in between section 2 and 3 for a break. To be fair, on that first one, I wasn't super prepared. Like I worked off of Des O'Neill, but didn't really understand what was going on. So it just turned into a frantic guessing game because
you didn't use the hard resources.
Yeah, well, there's that.
I don't think we were even around back then. So
didn't
anyway.
stay with you on that one. And then second time, I actually went and did a prep course, which was pretty good, but sadly didn't get that much higher of a mark. And then third time with the online GAMSAT, I mainly just focused on going through everything myself and really honing in on especially section 2 with the essay writing. And I found that helped a lot more in the long run.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, here you are in Griffith University. And maybe we can switch over to Gianni. Maybe you can tell us a bit about how your journey into medicine was and just tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah. So mine was, I guess we started a bit of a similar place. I did a Bachelor of Science, but at Melbourne Uni, majored in physiology. And at the start, I did a Bachelor of Science because I wasn't too sure where I wanted to go. But as I kind of went through, I realized like biomedical science and medicine specifically was something that really took my interest. And so I sat the GAMSAT twice during my time there. And first time, similar to Perry, I wasn't too prepared. And then after that, and being a bit disappointed, I went back and my strategy was like making a bit of a close group with my friends who were also sitting it. And we did a lot of group study, like compared answers, ways we were thinking about things, looked at each other's essays and did a bit better. But unfortunately, after I finished getting towards the end of my degree, I didn't get a first round offer. And so, I was actually on another episode of this podcast, and I talked a bit about my experience getting in, because I got my offer 4 days before orientation week at University of Queensland. So it's a bit of a late entry into medicine, but we got in nonetheless. And so, I'm in my second year now, and I've enjoyed it so far. And actually, I forgot to mention that I interviewed at Deakin University in Victoria, and then got in up here.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, you had a bit of an interesting pathway into medicine. I think we had an episode for our listeners called it was an unusual entry into medicine, or I think it was last minute offers for medicine.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And it's just how to manage that, because I think you had a very stressful time starting your medical degree.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Very understandable considering you only had 4 days notice. But we're glad you got there in the end. And it obviously worked out quite well for you, which is great. Okay, so just moving on to our next question. So Perry, tell us a little bit about universities and what place is available. How did you apply? Application requirements. Just tell us all about that.
Okay, sure. It's through the GEMSAS process. You apply to Griffith through that. They mainly rely on GPA, GAMSAT, and your interview. So Griffith, to my understanding of Griffith's interviews, especially because of the COVID situation, they did it online. It was like an MMI style, and you spoke to someone on the other end, but I'm pretty sure you didn't actually see the examiner, but they were there. They would speak to you here and there. And it was mainly like ethical sort of questions, I guess, I don't know, your standard MMI. But seeing as I did my interview with Melbourne, I don't know exactly how they weighted it, but I think just based off my experience that it's mainly to do with GPA, the interview itself, more so than the GAMSAT. And as for the uni themselves, they've got 2 sites. So one's a campus at the Gold Coast, and the other one's a site at the hospital at Sunshine Coast University Hospital, and that's where I'm at. The Gold Coast has about 150 students they take a year, and Sunshine Coast has about 50. There's no portfolio needed or anything like that. It's just you apply through GEMSAS and then sit the interview, and hopefully you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell us what determines whether you end up going to Sunshine Coast versus Gold Coast?
All right, I kind of forgot to talk on that, When you apply on GEMSAS, there's like a little box that you can tick. You can pick whether you want to go to the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast. Tell you the truth, I can't remember which one I picked. I think it was Sunshine Coast, because I was like, oh, if I'm going to move to Queensland, I might as well just go wherever. It doesn't matter.
Okay, yeah, great. So you decided to go to Sunshine Coast. Would you say there's any advantages or disadvantages to going towards one or the other?
I think I honestly quite like the Sunshine Coast Uni. Like, for one, it's because it's not as busy as the Gold Coast is. So it's a bit more of a laid back vibe. It's got plenty of beaches and things around. So there's a lot for you to do outside of uni. Like, I know there's a lot of people that are taking up surfing. Mm-hmm. Whereas like you can't really do that much at the Gold Coast. It's like heavy traffic, people everywhere. And also the cohort itself is bigger. Mm. So, I mean, it's got its own pros there. But I think having the smaller cohort in the Sunshine Coast is great, because you get to know everyone and you even get to spend more time with like staff members. So it's just, I think it's a more personal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds really good. And you sat the interviews at Melbourne, which were actually an online recorded interview. So you were talking sort of into the web, so to speak. You weren't actually talking to anyone. Can you tell us about your experience there? What was that like?
Well, I remember like when first hearing about it, I was like freaking out. It's like, how can you do an interview and you're not talking to anyone? It's like I don't know how many people have done it, but it's like those interviews you do on your phone, and it brings up like the question on the screen. They give you a little bit of time to think about it, and then you just record your answer for about a minute.
Mm.
Was sort of like that. I mean, they had a bit more than just questions. They had like things to guide you, but yeah, I think with a lot of practice, I became used to it in a way.
Yeah. Did you find it difficult, the lack of face-to-face contact in the interview?
Well, I know that I think most people did, but surprisingly enough, I think I did all right with that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Bit of practice recording on your phone, you kind of get used to it.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting how they run interviews from now on. Obviously, COVID year is a bit of a special case. And I'd be very surprised if they kept running interviews online, but perhaps it can become an option for students from interstate who don't want to travel. Okay, great. So, Gianni, on to you. So tell us about your university. What places are available? How do you apply? Application requirements, etc.
Yeah, and so in that way, it's kind of very similar to Griffith. And so through GemSAS, I'm pretty sure the way it's weighted is a 25% on your GPA, 25% for GAMSAT, and 50% interview. If I'm not mistaken, it may have changed. And so basically that's how you get in, no portfolio. And there also are a couple different ways to be aware of. So like through GemSAS, you can get like a full fee placement, a CSP or a BMP. And there's an undergrad pathway. So if you went, well, I guess more commonly if you're from Queensland, but if you do really well, say in year 12, you can get offered a guaranteed spot, and you just have to complete an undergrad at the University of Queensland, and you're guaranteed entry into medicine as long as you retain a certain grade. And then there's also another program that they have, which isn't really applicable to Australian listeners, but it's called the Oshner program. And it's connected to a hospital in America. And basically there's about 180 students who come here for 2 years to study and then go back there for the 2 clinical years. And so in our cohort, which is about 500 students, so I think if I'm not mistaken, the biggest in Australia in terms of med schools, we've got about 180 students from the US in that cohort as well for the first 2 years. So yeah, it's a few different ways to get in.
Yeah, well, it's a huge cohort, 500. Just for context, Melbourne is also one of the biggest cohorts in terms of medical schools. I think we only have about 300 every year. Okay, cool. So moving on to the next question, on to Perry. What do clinical and preclinical years look like in terms of Griffith, and how would you sort of break down the course?
All right, well, the first 2 years are preclinical, so we're mainly just learning about the theory. I mean, I guess it's a bit more than that because we do cover we've covered some physical examinations, for example. We do those sorts of practical things, and we have our own comm skills tutors as well. And we actually do community placements on top of that too. So it's pretty good in that regard. As for third and fourth year, those are actually the clinical years. So they have around 5 or 6 specialties in the hospital that they rotate through. And I could be wrong, but I think in fourth year, you don't have to do the rotations at SCU, so at the Sunshine Coast Uni Hospital. I think you can go to, they've got partnerships with the Nambour Hospital and some of the other Queensland Health locations.
Yeah, absolutely. And is there a particular way that they assign hospitals, or is it sort of just random?
Oh, I think it's mainly through the hospital that I'm at now that you're pretty much there. But I think if you put your preferences in or speak to course conveners, you can go to a different hospital. But as far as I'm aware, it's mainly where I'm at now.
Yeah, absolutely. And because Queensland's so big and there's so many rural towns, is there opportunities to do rural placement, for example?
Yeah, well, that comes under the main one I could think of was the Nambour Hospital, which is um, it's a bit more inland compared to the actual coast.
Yep.
But I think there are other spots, but I cannot remember off the top of my head.
Mm. Okay. And does the university provide any other opportunities for learning outside of the clinical years? Like, for example, can you guys do trips to other states or anything like that?
I know that the Gold Coast, they have some of their placements. They can have that in New South Wales. So I think there's some rural hospitals or something like that where they can go and do their placements there. But you can also apply to do courses or some subjects that are approved electives overseas. But I have no idea when that's going to start with all the COVID stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, and you mentioned community placement in first year. So is that just placement with a GP?
It's actually a bit broad. It's we've got things like the needle and syringe program, an organization called Sunny Street, Teddy Bear Hospital. It's like all these different programs that are, I guess, a bit broad that you wouldn't have thought you'd be going into as a medical student. But I still think that they're great because it opens your eyes to, I guess, a whole variety of walks of life.
And are there like any medical school societies that you can get a part of or get involved in?
There's a few. The main one is like the Griffith Uni Medicine Society, the GUMS. So they've got that, which they offer you like many different events. Like we had the scrub crawl, and now we've got ball coming up as well. But there's some other little groups as well. There's the Surgia, which is basically the Surgical Student Society.
Yep.
They do a whole lot of fun things and trying to get you interested in surgery. There's one called Into Med. Now, I haven't really spent much time with them, but I know that they run like different shoots and courses and things to help you with medicine. There's a few.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds really cool. All right. Thank you for sharing that. So Gianni, tell me about your preclinical years, what your course looks like, how it's broken down.
Yeah, and so ours overall is fairly similar. So 2 years preclinical and then 2 years clinical. And so I'm in my second year now, so I do know the preclinical stage a bit more than the clinical stage, but there is a fair bit going on. So I'll try and break it down a little bit. And so, well, first year, you're basically in the classroom most of the time at the University of Queensland campus, which is very close to Brisbane CBD, and mainly in the classroom, but you do have a few other subjects where you'll learn a bit of ethics and like how to become a good doctor, a bit of public health in a HSR subject, which is Health Society and Research, and a bit of, say, physical exams and how to communicate with patients in our clinical practice subject. And so overall first year is mainly in the classroom, but you do get these opportunities to branch out in different areas. And at the end of first year, I think one of the highlights of first year for me at least was our observership, which is a 4-week observational placement done at the end of the year. And that's primarily self-arranged, but the university does have some programs where you can get arranged through them. And that was really good. So I did that at a GP, and I just found it such a great experience where I could just kind of sit there and just see like, well, how medicine works from the doctor's perspective, because I think we've all been a patient at one point or other in our lives, but it was nice to see it from the other side. And you could do that in any specialty. So that was a really good opportunity to see if you could, say, contact a specific type of surgery that you wanted to, cardiology or respiratory medicine. You could find somewhere that you were interested in if someone wanted to take you, and kind of just annoy them for a few weeks. And that also traditionally you could do anywhere in Australia. So I was kind of hoping I could do it in Victoria and come back and spend a bit of time with my family. But because of COVID, we were limited to Queensland, but that may change in future years. Yeah, so that's the majority of first year. And then second year is your last preclinical year. So the first half of the year is very similar. So you're going through just some more clinical science and learning medicine. You still got your ethics and your health society and research subjects, but your clinical practice now has moved from learning exams on other students to spending a few hours a week in the hospital and getting to take histories from patients or do physical exams on patients. So getting a bit more patient experience and really kind of getting comfortable in the hospital setting before being there permanently years 3 and 4, which I think is a really good transition. And the second semester of year 2, which I kind of really like and it's put me a bit at ease, is essentially a big putting it all together semester. So we've learned a lot of concepts separately, and it's like kind of, all right, now let's put it together and think about medicine as a whole and not just in different systems, which I think is a great way to kind of prepare you for getting into the clinical years. And so about those, so you can do that either in Brisbane, and your main options is like north side, so like north of the Brisbane River, or south, which is all the hospitals south of the Brisbane River, which kind of runs directly through the city if you don't know Brisbane too well. And then there's also a lot of rural placements where you can elect to be for the whole year. So that's like Toowoomba, Rockhampton, Hervey Bay, and Bundaberg. And so you can either be there for a whole year at a time, or if you, like, everyone has to do a 12-week placement at some point, but if you really want to, you can elect to do more rural placements, but still not spend the whole year. So there's a lot of flexibility there with where you want to be and how long you want to spend rural. And there's a lot of support if you want to go rural with very subsidized accommodation. Yeah. And I guess as well, other opportunities, which with COVID, I'm not 100% sure when these will be running again. But in 4th year, you can elect to do one of your rotations in a partnered hospital in England. I'm not sure which hospital that is, but it's an opportunity to be there for 12 weeks. And as well in America at the partnered Oshner School. So that's 12 weeks there in Louisiana. So there's a couple options to go overseas as well.
That's fantastic. It sounds super exciting. So very clinical focused, even sort of in your first few years, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I mean, you've actually been in the course for quite a while, so maybe tell us, how have you been finding it in terms of enjoyment, stress, all that stuff? How have you been finding the course in general?
Yeah, and so I think probably as any medical student will tell you, it's definitely a big adjustment to what you've been studying before. And so you kind of, I think I've heard like being fed through a fire hose, like is kind of what you feel like when you start. And it's a big change and you're learning a lot of content very fast. But I think after the initial adjustment, which to be honest, is never really easy, and everyone's in the same boat as well. So don't ever feel like you're the only one who's finding it difficult. You get used to, well, how you can approach the study medicine, where you should look for resources, like what kind of notes you should be making, if notes are the thing that works for you. And so after a while, you get used to it. And I think the stress it's always there, but it's a manageable level. And so I think definitely UQ that you get thrown a lot of content, but it's in a way that really prepares you, I guess, for giving you all the information for later on in your medical journey. And something I forgot to mention before as well was that second semester and second year, you do have an elective course, which can be like a research project or spending time with a GP or learning a bit about rural health or digital medicine, or like there's a whole bunch of different things you can have a look into, which is great because I know a lot of times courses like this really kind of stick you on one track and that's all you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities available, which is really, really good.
Yeah.
What about in terms of like societies? So, there are lots of societies you can join.
Yeah, so there is a lot of societies actually. That's kind of one of the biggest things here at UQ, I think, is there's the University of Queensland Medical Society. So UQMS is like our big overarching society. And I've been involved in that here and there. And it's really good. And I encourage anyone who gets into any med school to try and get involved because it's a good opportunity to meet people in other years, get a bit of an understanding of how a lot of medicine works and get some experience in, say, advocacy or whatever your interests lie in. And so there's that, but then as well, there's interest societies for almost anything you can think of. So we've got like a supporting women in medicine, so the SWIM Society, there's a UQ Derm Society for dermatology, like a GP one, a pediatrics one, an emergency medicine society. There's our Rainbow Med, which is our LGBTQI plus society. And there are many more, and I feel bad for forgetting. Like there's an Obs and Gynae one, and many, many societies. So if you're interested in something, there's going to be a society there to provide some events and information and like something to get involved in. Yeah.
If you have an interest in something, UQ has a society for you. That's
Yeah, exactly.
All right, beautiful. Thanks for sharing all that. Just moving on to sort of our last question. So moving on to Perry. If you can think of a particular selling point for your uni that sort of sets it apart, what would that be?
I think there's quite a few good points about it, and I've sort of touched on them before. But I suppose the main one is the fact that it is like such a small, close-knit cohort, just because you get to make really close friends that you can work through for that whole 4-year degree. Get to learn about your staff, about the staff members as well, and form relationships there. But it's also just great because with that small cohort, they tend to form not so much the society is kind of like UQ, but more we have little groups that we have outside of uni. So there's the volleyball club, there's like run club, things like that aren't really a society, but just a bunch of us that get together and go have a bit of fun, which is nice. But yeah, I think that's the main point. But I guess just a smaller good point is the fact that it's just the med school that's run up here. So we don't really have other schools, like there's no economics or anything like that. So it's just focused on us and giving like the best quality education that we can get. So they kind of hit two birds, one stone there, in the sense that like it's good education, but it's also fun.
Sounds like very wholesome vibes there. All right. And what about you, Gianni? Is there anything that you'd say is a very specific selling point for UQ?
Well, something, to be honest, I didn't really know about UQ until I got up here. They offer a big range of opportunities, I guess, like, yeah, from the social aspect, as well as, say, the professional aspect. Like, there's an option to do a concurrent, like, Masters of Public Health. So it's like you can do a Masters of Public Health and finish at the same time as your MD. So, like, with no extra time, which is really good. It's a lot of work from what I've heard, but it's a really good option. There's like a PhD program where you can find someone through here and complete a PhD. Kind of halfway through your degree, you'll extend it, but do that with the degree. And there's a lot of like research opportunity. So there's a lot of this opportunity to build your resume, do a lot of extracurricular stuff, and like go into areas that you have interest in, like throughout the program, which I think is great if you're someone who's really like, you know, academically inclined or has an interest in those areas, there's something there for you. And I think as well, the Great Rural Program, like the amount of different areas and support that UQ puts towards rural medicine and education is really good. And the financial support you get, I've just learned a bit more about it recently, and it's very helpful and encouraging. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think one really interesting thing that's come out of this is that for both of you, like, you know, these universities weren't necessarily where you interviewed, but it seems like you both had such a positive experience, which is goes to show just how great some of the universities in Australia really are. And that sort of brings us to the end of this particular episode where we talk about universities in Queensland that provide a medical course. But we've put out some other episodes as well that our listeners can check out for New South Wales, Victoria, and other states in Australia. But anyway, thank you for both coming. We really appreciate your time. You've both been absolutely wonderful. And we really appreciate you providing this information for our listeners. I think they'll find it super, super useful. And it's just not something that they can find online, getting this sort of discussion. So we really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Making of an Incredible MD podcast by Allied to Health. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word about our podcast. And we'd love to hear your feedback. So send us an email or message on Facebook. All of our links are in the show notes. Thanks. We'll see you next time.